Welcome to another episode of the Expanding on Consciousness podcast. This one is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Monica Gagliano, who has done some extraordinary research on consciousness as it pertains to plant life. In part 1, I introduced Dr. Gagliano as not only a self-actualized, but also as a self-realized person, which I think is a running theme with many of the guests that we have spoken with thus far. Now, those two terms, self-actualization and self-realization, depict two slightly different yet convergent aspects of this thing that we call consciousness, which perhaps might need a bit of definition. So I thought it would be a good preamble for part 2 of this interview to start off with a brief description of both to avoid any confusion. Self-actualization is a term introduced by 3 psychologists who were studying the growth of human beings in the individuation process and included the ability to live a fulfilling life. And these 3 were Abe Maslow, Kurt Goldstein, and Carl Rogers. There are probably others, but those are the top 3 that I know of. Each of these contributed quite a lot to the conversation of consciousness, perhaps Maslow being the most famous given that his hierarchy of needs, expressed in the form of a pyramid, is best known. Now, I'm not here to give a presentation on the process of self-actualization, so if you want to know more about this, the internet is literally ripe with all sorts of things that you can learn about the concept. Suffice to say for now, self-actualization is a function of consciousness, where the inner self is recognized at a point in life and expressed in one's life. To my way of thinking, this makes self-actualization a function of consciousness. You have to kind of know who you are to at least some degree to shoot for the North Star that will enable you to live a very fulfilling life. And up the pyramid you go. You end up fulfilling your intellectual needs, your base needs, you have a roof over your head, you have a society that you become a part of, etc., etc. It's a form of individuation from knowing who you are deep within you, knowing what truly interests you and going for that. It makes for a very fulfilling life. Self-realization is also considered a function of consciousness, but it's a consciousness of, let's say, a different order. The realization of this self has less to do with the life of an individual ego and the fulfillment needs in order to ascend the pyramid of self-actualization. And it has more to do with having certain experiences in consciousness which bring about a rather unique recognition of the self as being much more than the familiar self, which is a result of cumulative life experiences, something outside of the familiar self. I'm referring to normal life experiences versus anomalous experiences in consciousness, which are of a more ego-transcendent variety. These can include things like unity experiences, out-of-body experiences, any form of transcendent experience which tells us something about the true nature of the self and actually serves to stretch the thresholds of self-knowledge. Now, this realization, coincidentally, Maslow discovered is actually something that's quite common to most of the self-actualized people he studied once they reached the apex of his pyramid. So literally, people made this climb of a recognition of something inside the self to expressing it to outside of the self, and then use that momentum to create a fulfilling life. And once they reached this apex of the pyramid, they became self-actualized. And once that occurred, they started to have a knowledge that something more about themselves also existed, that they were in unity with all of life. So it's a very similar type of experience, but a very different pathway of getting there. So although we're discussing two allegedly distinct functions of consciousness and experiences which result from them, we're seeing correlations, or perhaps more to the point, a convergence, which is the result of two slightly different paths of self-discovery. Monica Gagliano has explored both of these paths. In part one, you'll hear the story of a woman moving towards achieving her professional goals in order to actualize the self that she'd always dreamed of. She followed her North Star, and it served her very well. She worked very hard, and she broke new ground in science that I'm personally hopeful will serve the body of knowledge surrounding this thing called consciousness by expanding our understanding of how different species express consciousness. On the journey, however, she learned something which is perhaps more than she bargained for. In my humble opinion, her story has the potential to teach us something about self-actualization and self-realization. So without further exordium, here is part two of my conversation with Dr. Monica Gagliano. The reason I ask you such a bizarre question of a scientist is because I don't see you only as a scientist. I see you as a messenger, and a messenger who brings a life experience, not a concept, but a life experience that seems to be verified by life itself, that is speaking in a unique way. I know that's flowery language, and I know that's very unscientific, but as I was doing my research on Monica Gagliano, I got that distinct impression. And I never heard you speak on this before. Am I correct?
I don't know, because when I speak, I just speak what the moment is calling, and then that's it.
Well, there you go.
Even with my book, some people have like, oh, I love that bit where you say that and that about this. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's in that book. I wrote what it needed to be written, and then it's done and it's gone. And literally a friend of mine gifted me my own book because I didn't have a copy of myself. And she said, like, so one day you might want to read it. And I'm like, yeah, that would be a good idea.
You didn't have a
just
copy
so that I
of
know
your
what's
own
in there.
book.
No.
Yeah. That's probably a good idea, because I'm sure people are going to ask you questions about that. So I found myself thinking a lot about one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Campbell, which says that the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which a mystic swims with delight.
Beautiful.
I imagine that the same thing applies for many scientists. Scientists are very linear. As you said, you're very good at conducting experiments and design. You obviously are sometimes hopeful for an outcome because you're human and humans have hope, but you're objective enough to at least design a good experiment. And believe me, audience, there are a lot of great experiments here that Monica has done. Pay attention, check them out. But I imagine that at some point, a scientist who might be of one particular ilk, one that has not grown up with this sense of magic and interconnectedness and an awareness that something else was going on. I'll call that an expanded state of consciousness, a more mystical state of consciousness, finds themselves in very deep waters when confronted with the type of experiments that are, and the results of such experiments. They're good experiments. You are very different in that respect. And you seem to have assimilated this truth about consciousness, which allows you to conduct not only the real good research, but go where the trail leads you, which in my opinion is good science and the hallmark of somebody searching for truth, self-realization, self-actualization. So my question in that preface, is where has this trail of information about consciousness led you personally? How have you come to assimilate all of the findings through your life experience?
So two things that I like to share. One that speaks to something that you mentioned. When I was doing the experiment to test associative learning in the pea plants, that's the Pavlovian dog experiment, but with the pea.
I wonder if we should tell the audience what that pea plant was quickly, the experiment.
Okay. So the experiment, just like the experiment that Pavlov did with the dog, is like... in that experiment, Pavlov noticed that the dog was expecting dinner just by associating the sound of a bell, which didn't mean anything, to the arrival of dinner through repetition. So every time that he would ring the bell, the dog would start salivating, expecting dinner to arrive, and then dinner arrives. And even if dinner doesn't arrive, the dog still expects it.
Right.
So the dog is kind of projecting into the future something that is happening that is not even in its environment yet.
Imagining dinner.
That's right.
Right.
So I took exactly I took the same kind of design and just applied it to a plant. And in this case, the bell was substituted with a little fan, and dinner for the peas were blue light. And I put them inside a little two-way maze so that their decision-making was very easy to define. Because they naturally bend towards the light, especially when they're so little. And so bending one side or the other, if they are in a maze, is like you need to commit to your decision once you're done it. So, and of course, to cut the story short, like the peas perform wonderfully and they are very good learners. And they know exactly the fan, just like the bell, that didn't mean anything to start with, acquires meaning for the plants. And the plants will use that signal to determine which way inside the maze to go, because that's the way, correctly, that the dinner is expected to arrive from.
Right.
And just like the dog, even if the dinner then it doesn't arrive, so the light never comes, the plant is committing itself to that direction because it's projecting into the future or imagining the dinner arriving from that side.
So this is not some instinctual thing that
it's learned.
Right. It's learned behavior. So there you were working with the pea plant.
That's right. So this experiment was really important for me personally as the scientist and as the human being in general, because, well, first of all, I had tried to to test this kind of learning a couple of years earlier and failed miserably. Technically speaking, in the design, everything looked really good, but the plants were not doing anything. And so I just assumed that, okay, plants cannot do this kind of learning and left it. And then I was doing some work in the Amazon with plants there. And then I was doing a process called the Dieta. And during the Dieta, which is like a meditation with the plants in a very extended and deep space. And during that time, I was literally dictated this experiment. So I find myself writing down notes in my diary. And first, I didn't realize what they were. And then as I'm writing them, as if someone is telling me, I realized oh my God, this is an experiment. And the plants gave me details about everything. So then, of course, I came back home with this information. I went into the lab and started setting up the things exactly as I was told. And 2 weeks later, into the piloting, things are not working. Or so I thought.
Right.
So I'm there inside this room. The experiment needs to be done in the dark and in the cold, because that's what peas like. And I'm in there. And after 2 weeks of spending lots of hours in this room, in this space, I'm like, what an idiot. I thought, a plant told me, and I just stupidly followed the instructions, that the plant gave me.
My imagination ran away with me. I'm not conducting good science. I'm going to be laughed at. All the things that go
right. That's like, here I'm the psychopath drowning in the waters instead of...
Right.
And so I was like, what was I thinking? And I felt really, really horrible. And so I had decided with my tail in between my legs and feeling very like, okay, I already tried it once and it wasn't working. And obviously it's just confirming again that associative learning in plants is not possible.
Right.
And so I decided that on that following weekend, I would have gone in, because the weekend it's easier. There is not too many people. You can open doors and lift things and move stuff. It's just practically, a bit easier to conduct that dismantling of things. And so the idea was to go in and just, clear the lab, just terminate everything and clear the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And when that day I went in, and it was 40 degrees or something like that out, and like very hot, sunny outside, and I got inside into this cold and dark room. So even the metaphorically, even just the two spaces, very different. And there is this door that I need to open, which is the one that separates the two environments.
Uh-huh.
And I went in and I was about to turn the lights on and, start dismantling things. And something, again, these moments where the little message or the little signal is being given and you can follow it or not. And if I didn't follow it, we wouldn't be even talking about this at all. And there would be no plant associative learning. But a little voice was like, wait a second. And I'm like, okay. Wait a second before you turn the light on and have another look.
All right.
So I was like, okay, what is this about? And so I, looked into my little mazes one more time, and the blue light is on one side. And that's the only light there is in the room,
okay.
The light that is useful for the peas.
Right.
And suddenly, I cannot explain this. But suddenly I saw something that until that moment I was incapable of seeing. So for the last 2 weeks, the plants have performed precisely as I was in a way hoping that they would.
Right.
But my training, I was conditioned to see and to think of this in a particular way. So my own training would not allow me to see what was right in front of my eyes. So suddenly I realized, oh my God, the plants have been showing me that they can do this. They've been learning. They were like right there.
Right.
But I couldn't see it. I thought they didn't.
Was it a different light that you were in?
No.
Was it?
No.
Okay.
The conditioning was that when we do experiments of this kind, we are often, whether it's an animal or a plant or whatever, actually, plants, we don't often do this, but with animal studies, when we put things inside a maze and we give them a 50-50 opportunity of choice,
right,
you assume that 50-50 is your baseline.
Right.
So if you deviate from 50-50, then we have a result. Otherwise, it's just, it's just by chance, it's random. But the thing, so when I was looking at my plants, it looked like it was just off 50-50. But in that moment, I realized, but 50-50 is not my baseline. Because if I put a plant inside a maze and I put light on one side, the plants will not go random. It would always go to the light.
Right.
So that is my baseline, not like randomness.
Right.
So plants already don't behave randomly. Plants behave in a very specific way.
Right.
And what they were doing in the lab by showing me that they could learn, they were going against their instinctual way of going towards the light, the actual light,
right,
and following a fan,
right,
just because the fan now means something.
Right.
So that is a strong decision. That's not just like, oh, I randomly went one way or another, but it's like, I'm not going to trust my instinct.
Right.
And instead, I'm going based on my new learning. That's what they were doing.
Which is
I know.
counterintuitive to any species, really.
That's right.
I would think,
That's
that makes them so unique.
But the amazing thing is, from the personal way of seeing this, is that in that moment, I also realized so clearly, why and where my colleagues, especially the ones that they were really quite aggressive about, against the work that I was doing.
Right.
I realized, they just cannot see. Not because these
see.
are not bad people,
Right.
or they're like, they just want to be nasty because it's fun or any of this. It's like, I am not the victim here. They are.
Right.
They are the victim of the fact that they cannot actually see the same way as a few seconds before I was.
Right.
And so it gave me this appreciation for where they were, but also an understanding that now it's been growing much deeper, that we can talk to a certain paradigm up to a certain point. We can even show a certain paradigm so that you think like, hey, it's right here. But if that paradigm cannot see, it's not because it's bad or because it doesn't want to. It literally, in that paradigm, what you're showing does not exist. And so there is not much else that you can do except carry on along your path and hope that eventually that paradigm will be able to see. And if not ever, that's okay too.
Cognitive
and this
dissonance.
For me was really important. That's right.
Cognitive dissonance based on prior conditioning is one thing. Defending that through a sense of pride, through a sense of needing to hold on to one's conditioning is another story. Either way, you cannot do anything about it, but you can show the light, which is exactly what I see you doing. I'm fascinated by that communication that came to you when you walked into the room. What do you think that came from? I know we're talking pure conjecture here and not science, but just from your personal experience and what you now come to understand about the nature of consciousness.
Well, I think it was because, as I said, I did this deep work with a plant while I was in the Amazon. This is not even an hallucinogenic plant. This is just a big tree, but it's got a lot to teach. And to me, that was her voice. But even as I say that, this is a way for, I recognize that this is a way as the human self, the smaller version of me as the human self, it's a way to give words to something, as I was saying before, that cannot be spoken of. So it's like, it was the plant and the connection with the plant. And at one level, that's true. To me, that's true. I also know that at another level, I could say that, it was my higher self. It was the self that can see everything. And at another level yet, I could say like, well, it's consciousness speaking to itself, knowing what it wants to do next, what game it wants to play next. And so it's just directing the show. And so all of these layers are true. And it could also be, it's my mad voice in my head. and that also probably is true.
You have to be able to go a little mad when dealing with something called consciousness. Carl Jung called that state a state of active imagination. And through it would be the ability to tap into not only the personal unconscious, but the collective unconscious.
That's right.
It seems to me that plants, how shall I label this? I'm thinking about gradations of this thing that we call consciousness in levels of sophistication. It seems to me that insects are perceived by human beings as being a lower level or less sophisticated level of consciousness, and they work very well together in a very organized and mobile fashion that enables them to accomplish great things, building an anthill, building a beehive. The same applies for dogs and, other pack animals who work together to feed the community. A higher level of sophistication seems to also indicate the need to butt heads. Tribal animals tend to argue amongst themselves, even though they're working together. There's a pack hierarchy. That exists within insects, but it doesn't seem to be anybody butting each other's heads. It's like they all accept, okay, we have one leader and the rest of us are going, the queen bee, the queen ant, etc. Human beings obviously exhibit what I'll call the most sophisticated level of consciousness. We can think about our thinking or think about our thinking about our thinking, and we have a hall of mirrors of understanding the world around us, which seems very different from our animal brothers and sisters and cousins. And plants sat very low on this totem pole of consciousness, sophisticated consciousness, in my way of thinking, for a long time, right up until your experiments. It opened up something for me. I cannot look in my houseplants anymore without sending a vibration of appreciation. I love plants. I water them, I tend to them, and I always thought of them as if they were conscious at all, it was a very simple form of consciousness. I want to be gentle when I use that word. But we are not talking about a simple form of consciousness at all. We are learning more and more about how plants are interacting with each other as well as their environment. We're learning that, and in the 70s, I remember here in the States anyway, there was a lot of talk about making right music for plants. Some plants, and there were wonderful experiments done on this. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about plants and how they communicate. Do you think vibration plays a part in their communication style and how they assimilate the world?
I don't think. I know because we have evidence for that. So that's science speaking in a way. It's like you don't need my opinion. There is evidence for that, and there is beautiful evidence for that.
Let's talk about that evidence for a minute, because I think a lot of people are not aware of that.
So I'm aware of the literature or the work that you are pointing out in terms of the 60s and the use of music and sound to plants. And at one point, I even went and visited one of the communities in Italy who are still doing these kind of things. And there are lots of layers in this. So hopefully I don't get too lost. But fundamentally, the first important thing to say for me is that, as you know very well, given what you do, sound is everywhere. And it would be ridiculous to think that plants who are sitting there, apparently, to us, wouldn't be able to detect and or at least perceive the sounds around them. Now, my curiosity around this was emerged because of my own experiences and my own interest with the Amazonian practices and shamanic practices from that part of the world, and also other part of the world where there is this story about plants and human communicating and sharing through songs and sound. And in some places they got specific names, and they're used also then for healing and all sorts of other things. So I was wondering, for a story like that to be so persistent and remaining in our culture as humanity for so long, whether there is a grain of truth in there, or it's worthwhile checking. So that's where I was coming in from, and so I asked the simple question of can plants detect, emit, detect, and respond to sound? And of course, as you know, sound is an acoustic vibration, as the same, and acoustic vibration are of mechanical nature. And what it means is that if you are a body of any kind, you will have the potential to be impacted by sound. Whether then you are actually using it and you're definitely, your body will be impacted by sound. Then whether you're going to do something with it is a different story. So that, I guess, was the interesting part. And what I found is that with colleagues in the UK who were working on sound in insects, actually, that you mentioned before, we use the same technology, which is laser technology. And for the first time, we were able to detect sound emitted by plants.
Emitted.
And then also, and then also plants receiving the sound and changing their behavior.
Right.
In that case, the first experiment done was looking at the roots, and how roots bended towards certain frequency, and they didn't care about the others. And of course, we don't know whether they don't care about the other frequencies because they really are ignoring them, as we know. Now they can do that as well.
Right.
Or they can't hear them because they're outside their own
Beyond
hearing
their perceptual
spectrum.
abilities.
That's right. So, and then from there, of course, I wrote a couple of pieces where I was suggesting different modality of how the sound could mediate their own, everyday life, and where the plants maybe would use it as almost like a echolocation tool, like bats and dolphins do.
Yeah, right.
That's right. You can send, if you are emitting sound, you can send your sound out and check whether there is a stone in front of you or not. And we do know the plants, and this is like from Darwin. We know the roots of plants are able to detect an approaching obstacle. So if there is a stone in the way, the plants already knows before arriving to it.
Right.
And they can turn, and we know that they mediate this chemically, but who knows, maybe they already know at a distance acoustically. And so my experiment in testing more directly the actual, if you're going to receive this sound, what do you do with it? And I use the sound of water because, of course, as we know, plants are very good at finding water. And we know this because, many, many studies have been done on the ability of roots to detect sources of nutrients and water based on humidity gradients or gradients in general.
Okay.
And I was thinking, well, if you're a plant and let's say there is a drought and your source of water is further away and is away to a distance where the humidity gradient won't get to you.
Right.
Well, you have two choices. Either you just die because you can't detect it, or if you can hear it, then you can at least direct your roots to the best possible direction that you can have. And may have a go at getting there.
Hope.
That's
okay.
That's right.
So go on, folks. Go.
And so I used again a maze kind of setup as I did in other experiments, and what I did, I recorded the sound of water in a pipe. And then I looked at what a plant would do in a two-way maze when there is water on one side and nothing on the other side. And as you would expect, the vast majority goes where the water is.
Sure.
Again, as we were saying before, the baseline is not 50-50, but is what the plants are actually really doing in the real world. So in the real world, the plants are very good at finding the source of water, and they will go to it. And we know that very well when we get our, toilet pipes broken or, things like that. Right. So then the question was like, okay, if I replace the actual water with the sound of water.
Right.
So there is no water here, just the sound of it.
Just the sound
would
of
the
water.
plants would the plants recognize somehow that sound as something that has a meaning for it? And then would it go to it? And of course, my various controls, I also had like the same speakers that were playing back the sound were playing back nothing, or they were playing back like white noise, so that there was like, okay, are they going to any noise or specifically to this noise?
Right.
And what we find is that they go specifically to the noise of water. And
the sound of water.
That's right.
And that sound, the frequency response of that sound. All right. If I stuck a microphone inside of the earth and it recorded an underground stream, it would have, at least to the equipment that I was using, the response pattern of the microphone, the response pattern of the electronics, let alone the sound, the response pattern of my hearing, would have a very different sound than, say, the sound of running water above ground. So there's a specific frequency range that this plant is now exposing itself to. Just wanted to throw that in there. Go ahead.
No, that's perfect, because in the first experiment that I was mentioning before with the colleagues in the UK, what we found is that the frequency that the plant seems to be very interested in, or at the very least, the roots were bending towards it, was in the range of 200, 300 hertz.
Interesting.
So, and then the other frequency that we tried, they were just growing with gravity. They didn't show any interest. Now, in this experiment with the water, of course, as you said, this is a very noisy recording.
Right.
It's got all sorts of other things in there. And but that would be the case also in the natural environment. You will have all sorts of noises going on. Now, when you look at the sonogram and where the energy of that recording is,
Right.
you see that there is a very clear, there is a lot of energy and a clear mark on the 200, 300 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started wondering, and this would need more experimentation, of course, and more testing, but I started wondering whether for some reason at that frequency or that frequency could be part of a new vocabulary to us that to the plants indicates, oh, this is water, or something that, oh, this is something I need, you know, and there is something about that frequency that is of interest. And now we've seen it twice.
Have you tried anything with regards to beats? Pulse code modulation or anything within that? Because it'd be really interesting because, to me anyway, I'm not conducting your experiments here. I'm interested to know if plants detect sound in the same analogous kind of way that human beings do, if they can differentiate a continuous frequency from, the attack of a frequency to the peak of a frequency to the decay of a frequency, if they would respond to a hand clap in equalized to 200 and 300 hertz range. And what would the pulse of that frequency be that they would respond to most? I could play with you and play with plants forever. Maybe one day I'll conduct the experiment and we'll just do this by ourselves.
That's right. We need to do it together, obviously.
I love where you're going with this. So in between 200 and 300 frequencies. So basically we know for a fact that plants respond and communicate through vibration, through sound.
Absolutely. And I have two other beautiful examples of this. They are not my work. These are colleagues that then have followed up on what I started, I guess.
Right.
One study was done in the US by a beautiful colleague, and she showed very briefly that the similar way, as I had the real thing, in this case was my water, and then the recording of the real thing. In her study, she had a caterpillar. Mm-hmm. So the real thing was the caterpillar chewing on someone's leaves.
Right.
And then she recorded that. And then she presented that sound to a plant that has not been chewed or experienced the caterpillar. Uh-huh. And the plant would put up the chemical defenses as if the caterpillar was actually there. Exactly. And there is one more study that also follows up on this trend. And this trend is, in this case, so mine was looking basically at nutrition and basic resources. Uh-huh. The second study is about defense. And the third one is about reproduction. So those are some of the main, aspect of the life of any organism. And in the reproduction space, of course, with the pollinators, this group in Israel, again, they know which pollinator pollinates this particular plant. Mm-hmm. They recorded the real bee going to the flower.
Right.
And then they played back the recording of this bee to a flower. And as if the bee was really there,
right,
the flower increased the amount of sugar in the nectar to be more attractive to the bee arriving, although there was no bee.
The flower was too messed.
That's right.
I'm blown away. Who knew? We're going to take a short break here and allow a word from our sponsor. We'll be back with Dr. Monica Gagliano in just a moment.
Expanding on Consciousness is brought to you by the Monroe Institute, a nonprofit organization and leader in consciousness education and research, teaching you how to actively explore and use expanded states of consciousness, providing direct experiences that are deeply personal, uniquely meaningful, and life-changing. Monroe has been helping people create more meaningful and joyful lives through the guided exploration of expanded consciousness for 50 years. Gain the knowledge and understanding you seek to create the life you desire. Learn more about where to start your journey to expanded awareness with Monroe. Visit monroeinstitute.org or check out our Expand Meditation app, available on the App Store or Google Play.
I'm blown away. If the audience could see my face, they would see my mouth wide open. I had no idea. And neither did you before you began all of this. For all of your...
Absolutely not.
So this wasn't a matter of hope. You weren't hoping to find these things. They just
No.
emerged. And you've lived your life in the same way. You've
That's
self-actualized to a marine scientist, following your North Star, which was apparently the love of wildlife based on the fact that you were raised in a concrete jungle. I get that. I did the exact same thing with music. I could not explain why music. I know that you're a musician. You play the sitar as well.
Yeah, try.
I heard you play. You play beautifully. You're no stranger to anomalous experience in consciousness. And I know that you don't advocate drug use. You said before that you were not, you're not using plant medicine, as they like to refer to it, to have these anomalous states. You're a practitioner of meditation. These are all byproducts of what happened afterwards for you, or after your findings with the plants, or have you always been involved in the mystical side, and when I say mystical, I mean mysterious, that which is hidden, that which is enlivening the spirit? Have you always been of that ilk, or did this come to you as a result of what you discovered with the consciousness of plants not being as expected, or as I would expect it anyway?
Well, you just, as you asked the question, you just reminded me of something that I haven't thought of for a very long time. When I was about 5 or 9, in that range,
Right.
in that age, I remember they were hideous, but I was making perfumes with the pine needles and experimenting with different plants, and I would making my own perfumes.
Right.
They were horrible. And then I would give them to my dad, and my dad had to pretend that he was going to use it, and he never did, and I know that. But it was like, your child is making your perfume. You
Right.
kind of had to pretend that it's really good.
Sure.
I couldn't even stand them. I was like, I'd have to try another one.
It didn't matter. It was your creation. He had to wear
That's
it.
right. That's right. And I think, and so you're reminding me of this just now, and what I'm thinking of, that I would like to use a word that has actually reemerged for me in the last few weeks. And it has reignited something that I think has been dormant for a while, waiting for this time. And it's the alchemical. That's what I would like to use as a word, the alchemical of. And because I think that alchemy as a word just, it really speaks a lot of what life is, right?
Yes.
And be engaging. And it's got a very scientific aspect to it, but it's also a very open and playful aspect of it. And I'm not an alchemist as such, but recently, as I said, in the last couple of weeks, I had a few experiences. I just, I had to get, a little brace for my wrist because... And then a week before, I did my back just playing with my dog, and I'm never sick. So suddenly, it feels almost like life is saying, you must stop.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, I get the message. And in the stopping, I've been asked to stop all of the ideas and the dreamings that I had, like, oh, I'm going to do this next. I want to do that next. Right. And I want you to drop everything. And during my meditation as well, that got reinforced over and over again. And in the process of stopping and not doing, of course, there is a chance for life to emerge in its new form in whatever it is that life wants to be doing next.
That's right.
And Yeah, and in the last couple of weeks, this word, alchemical, and the mysteries has emerged really strongly. And I can feel the joy that it's inside from that. And I have no idea where that is going to take. And but I've been waiting for a while to be reignited by something like this, like that by this feeling. And so, yeah, this was reminding me of is like, yeah, that's what alchemical and the mysteries is what I want to explore next.
I can't
whatever
wait.
that means.
I can't wait to hear what that turns out to be, and I'm glad to
That's
have played
right.
a part in that journey. I've been listening to a lot of the interviews you do, and you revealed at one point that you've had many lucid dreams in your life, and you understand the power inherent in following them, following any dream, any North Star that you know is deep inside you. But lucid dreams, for those who never had one, you become conscious that you're dreaming. You become aware. And if you can then interact with that environment, you are interacting with the purest form of either your personal consciousness, subconscious level, or a universal, more collective unconscious, which also is powerful. All of that is about relationship, in my opinion, if I was to encapsulate that. And I've heard you use the word relationship a lot in your interviews. On one of your pages in your website, it's tabbed The Resonant Earth. It's subtitled The Planetary Regeneration Through Sonic Midwifery. As I speak to you today and consider all of the work that you've done and your personal experience, what it has revealed, I'm very struck by your acknowledgement of relationship and interaction of all things. I find myself thinking of like the Gaia resonance theory, a notion that relationship is being essentially vibrational, an interaction. Because all sensory experience, even if it is the result of sensory input, cortical stimulation combined with memory, all sensory experience seems to have a vibrational quality to it. It can be measured in some way, and we know this is happening. So as I took note of you being a sitar player and a painter, I'm curious to know, has art always been a part of your life as well?
Yes and no. Yes, I used to paint a lot when I was at home, younger, before I left for uni. And then somehow when I went to uni, a lot of things got put away, you know, and it's almost like I had to, and this is a good metaphor for a bigger discussion as well. Like I had to literally forget many things about me to then rediscover myself again. So when I went to uni, I had to become the dry scientist. I had to really have that experience, and I had to go deeply into it and excel in it as well. To then realize that wasn't gonna explain enough, you know, that wasn't probably gonna be enough. And but without knowing it, you can realize that it's not enough. And that's when I was saying before about my colleagues not being able to see. Right. It's like, you know, that's what they are. They are in the place where I was, where you are trained to see things and do it in a particular way. And it's very useful, and it can work very well up to a point. And I think we are, more generally speaking, at that point where it's no longer enough. And we need to incorporate more of our artistic sides. And so I used to paint, and only after I started working with the plants again, I started painting. And my painting became totally different from what I used to do.
Of course.
And now they're just like, they just look like a crazy, but whatever, you know. And music was always, oh my God, music was always, I was so addicted to it. And yet again, my parents didn't have a stereo at home. Nobody played music. And the first taste of music that I got was through my uncle, who played vinyls. And so whenever I went and saw him, he would play vinyls for me and I would sing along. And it was amazing because I didn't know this until much, much later, but I could pick up the song immediately. Like I could hear, I would know exactly how the sound would go straight after.
Right.
And then it took many, many years again to rediscover music. I was the first one that bought a stereo in my house. And when I was 16 with my savings, I said, oh, finally, you know. And then I've been obsessed with music, but it was only again much later when I started working with the plants that I started also engaging again with music, but in a way of like, I don't want to just listen to it. I want to play. And I had no musical training whatsoever, of course. I still don't. And it became very clear to me, especially with music, because it's such a precious thing, that I didn't want to be trained. I have been trained before for my science, and for me to get out of my conditioning, and I know that there's still some things that I won't be able to see because of that conditioning. It was useful, but also limiting, and I don't want my music to suffer from that. So I'd rather be a lesser of a musician, but at least be able to enjoy playing just for the sake of playing music.
I fully
understand. While I was in that process of exploring, that's when the sitar came about, and I also play the uke and trying really anything that appears like an instrument, and then decide, okay, I'm really not good at this one. I really like this one, even if I'm not good at it. And then, but in that process, I found myself, you know, sitting with other people and just quietly singing, or so I thought I was quietly singing. And then comments like, Monica, you need to sing louder. And Monica, you know, you got an amazing voice. Monica, you know, and there was this constant invitation to like sing.
Right.
And so then I started singing and playing a little bit more overtly and sharing that a bit more just with friends and everything. And in that process, music has been such a amazing transformer for me. Like through music, I've learned so much, and I learned so much about fear and judgment, self-judgment, and all of that. And it's been an amazing journey. And now I would think it would be impossible. Literally, it would be impossible for me not to have music in my life. In fact, I always travel with an instrument. Now, these days, I used to travel a lot with the sitar. Then it became too much of a struggle instrument, because it's such a big thing. Exactly. Right. By the time I turned up at the airport in Dallas, actually, they wanted to dismantle my case. And, you know, it's a very delicate instrument. They wanted to dismantle the entire thing because they were convinced that I had some drugs, which, of course, I didn't.
Right.
And you know, the first question that the officer asked me was like, is there a bazooka? And I knew I wasn't supposed to laugh, because then they, you know, they are very seriously upset. So I had to just contain myself. Like, no, it's a beautiful musical instrument. And so I decided, okay, I think I'm going to travel with something that is, you know, people are more familiar with, so that they don't think that I'm traveling with weapons and a bit smaller. Exactly.
Right. Make your life a little bit easier. But it opened up an inspiration for you, I'm sure. Your book, Thus Spoke the Plant, for me, is an inspiration. It chronicles not only your journey of self-discovery and self-actualization, but also speaks to the inspiration and relationship between you and plants. Perhaps all of life. Perhaps music as well. I think it's a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it to everybody. What inspired your decision to publish it? You're a scientist. Why take that professional risk?
Yeah, I know. So in 2012, I came to the US actually, and I did a vision quest with Lakota elder. And part of the story is actually in the book as well. And during that time, during my vision quest, the message that I received a lot. It was an amazing, it took me 10 years to digest everything. But one of the clear messages was like, you need to tell our stories from the plants, and that's what your science needs to do. And so I was like, yeah, okay. So, and then, you see the unfolding, and in hindsight, you can see like, oh, wow, okay, this actually did happen. And I felt like, okay, I think I've done my job. I was asked to tell the story, and this is how they came about. And at the end of 2015, I found myself unemployed and unemployable. So I finished my grant at the university in UWA, and I applied for various position as well that were like, lower range than where I was at. And it seemed like it was not possible for me to find a job. And then it became clear that this was another one of those moments like now of pause, where life was saying like, you need to stop now. And so after, I would say a couple of months, the first month was like, yay, I'm free. And then reality arrived, and it's like, well, what am I going to do with my life now? Actually, this doesn't feel good. And I felt very poomy and depressed at the idea that I had to let go of myself as a scientist. I really felt like, okay, this is a dying, and I've always wanted to be a scientist. I've been a scientist, as I said, since I was a child. So I've, such an attachment to that identity that is like, no, this is very painful. In the process of that, one morning, I woke up and I remembered the same voice that I heard when I was up in the hill doing my vision quest. And the plants were like, we told you, you need to tell our stories. That's what you do. And I'm like, I did. And look where it landed me. Like, I did tell your stories, and now I'm unemployed. I'm feeling sorry for myself. And the plants was like, you didn't tell the story, not all of the story. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I was like, you need to tell the entire story, not just your science, but how that science actually came about. And I was like, oh no, and as I said, I was already I realized that this was going to be the end of my scientist entity or identity. And I was like, this is really like, the nail in the coffin. If I publish something like this, there's really no way they will ever consider me seriously. And the plants were like, don't worry about it, but you haven't finished your job. So I started writing, and reluctantly so. And then eventually the book came out, when it was done. And in the course of the writing, there were a lot of interruptions by plants. It was like, oh, you need to come and, see us over here, or come and work with me over there. And so some parts, came alive and were only possible because of those relationships emerging at that time. And so the book is kind of like, it was about what happened in the past, but also it was emerging literally as I was engaging with the stories. And then the plants, I'm about a few months before the deadline to the publisher. And I'm in my garden, veggie patch, and I'm talking to the parsley. And I just got invited, or there is this possibility to go to Mexico and have a meeting with the Virarica people that are the keeper of the peyote plants. And this is like, it just felt like such a opportunity, unique. I felt really grateful at the idea. And yet because during the 3 years of writing this book, or 2.5, I didn't have an income. So for some reason, weird stuff started happening. And the little money that I had saved, which there was no way it would have taken me for 2.5 years, somehow was there, and it wasn't, I was spending, and then suddenly some other money will return, and like as if I couldn't spend the money that I had. But eventually I got down to the last few $1,000s, and I thought, if I go to Mexico for this opportunity, I will be basically, one, spending all the money that I have left, and then I'm really like with nothing. And two, I have this deadline, and I haven't even written half of the book, and it's due in May, and it's February. And so I'm sitting there, and my parse is like, so you have problem with time and money, are you? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, look, this is my situation. I'm like, So like every other human being, you know, you have problem with time and money. And you're writing this story to give a different possibility of imagining life. And yet when it comes to you, you can't do it, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is not fair.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. So the parcel basically said, well, it's your choice, but you have to choose between whether you're going to really write this book that is going to really offer something of a different way of living, or you're just going to be the same as everyone else in the same, you know, old story. But don't complain then if things don't work. So, of course, there was kind of like, oh, that's not a choice, is it?
Right. A choiceless choice.
Exactly. So I took the last few $1,000s that I had in my account and I bought a ticket to Mexico and met with these two filmmakers. Mm-hmm. And we had a beautiful time. We went and saw the Via Raurica. I had very amazing and incredible experiences. And then I came home. So by the time I came home, not only the two filmmakers had received a funding while the day I arrived in Mexico, the two filmmakers received some funding from Germany. Literally, the phone call arrived at 4:00 in the morning. And the only reason why one of the two filmmakers, the director, picked up the phone is because he was coming from Germany and it was such a strange phone call to receive, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And he was like, oh, congratulations. So the two filmmakers decided to cover all my costs, including the ticket of my flight.
There you go, right.
To be coming to Mexico with them. Mm-hmm. And then when I came home, I felt so inspired that, of course, I finished the book and I finished it a month earlier than the deadline.
Meanwhile, the plants are all laughing at you.
That's right. And not only that, but you know when I put the last full stop? On the 1st of April. April's Fool. And I remember putting the full stop, going outside, and my parsley was like, who is the fool now? And I'm like, yeah, thank you. And of course, the filmmakers that I'm talking about and the scenes that you actually are in Aware, the film that you were mentioning before.
Right, which brought me to you, which is why we're having this conversation.
It's a circle.
I have no idea where these roots are going to extend to, but I sense that your days as a scientist are not over. I have read your papers. I have seen your work. I have reviewed. I'm not a scientist, but I love science, and I read papers.
Yeah.
You do very good science. You have come up with amazing results. Someone is going to hear about this and want to pick up on this. Someone is going to ask you a lot of questions about how you were inspired to go with this. This little recording engineer over here is ready to do some simple experiments with plants and vibration based on what you've done. Your work, your willingness to be authentic. I've been engaged in psycho-spiritual work for a very long time. And I followed my bliss or my North Star and found some amazing things along my personal journey. So I know what this process is. The light of at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, is me. But I know light when I see it. I see it in you. I think what you have done is amazing. I think your work is amazing. I love your authenticity. I love your curiosity, what you bring to the conversation of consciousness. And I think the time has come for some very serious consideration about how we can all benefit from a wiser use of it. At least that's my dime store assumption. That's why we have these conversations. Before I go, I want to know what you're inspired to do next. You've finished this wonderful book. You've finished, I've done quite a lot of wonderful research. What are you inspired to do next? What do you see? What moves you now?
As I said, life at the moment is putting me on hold. That's how it feels. It's putting me in this space of not doing. And Resonant Earth has been an obsession for a few years now. and I thought that that's what I was doing. And I think it still is. It might be taking a very different form of what I had in my mind. And so at this stage, all I can say is that I am resting in terms of creativity. I'm resting so that what needs to come next can arrive. But as I also said before, the two words that come to mind that I think are going to be driving me and inspiring me forward and moving me forward are alchemy and mysteries. Like in the sense of almost the ancient mysteries of, the mysteries in Greece, the mysteries of the medieval time, the mysteries that we have had throughout our history as humanity that are still actually here. And they're not really mysteries. That's the thing. It's like we have actually gone into the mystery. And I think that the problem has always been the communicating these mysteries in a way that actually speaks to all of us. And ultimately it goes back to the circle. Is like, I think ultimately what we're talking about is the mystery, which is not a mystery, of what we are, who we are, the consciousness that we are.
Designing experiments around those mysteries would be something that I think you are quite capable of doing when you are inspired to do it and after your rest. Dr. Gagliano, I think you're a jewel. The name of the book is called Thus Spoke the Plant. You can find Dr. Gagliano's work on her website, monicadegagliano.com, and her many, many lectures you can find on YouTube. She is putting herself out there in a very unique way. Monica, thank you so very much for being a part of this conversation. I hope you'll come back and continue this discussion. Update us on your work. I think you're going to do great things, and you're one of those giants of consciousness science, in my mind.
Wow.
Your work will last long after the two of us are gone. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mark. It's been really beautiful.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2022, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.